Yeah, I think I already spoiled my 24th earlier on accident, but so
It's
I had the
okay.
Raiders at 24, and then I had the Indianapolis Colts at 23, the New Orleans Saints at 22, Minnesota Vikings at 21, Tampa Bay Buccaneers at 20, Chicago Bears at 19, Los Angeles Chargers at 18, Jacksonville Jaguars at 17.
So I had the Raiders at 24, the Chargers at 23, the Titans at 22, the Bucks at 21, the Jags at 20, the Vikings at 19, the Dolphins at 18, and the Bears at 17. Yes, I'm a little bit higher on the Bears, of course. But with that being said,
Not really by much though. Like
yeah,
honestly, that's
yeah.
very fair.
Let's go ahead and talk about the Saints because I had them at 25. So, Dobbs, why are you? I mean, I think their offense or their team is a little bit confusing, and I don't really know what to expect this year, especially with the new OC. So, why do you feel like the Saints are the 22nd team in these power rankings for you?
Well, here I think that this will give some good insight into part of it. Let me just do a quick count really quick because I actually forgot the exact number. I should have written this down. Just give me 1 second
No, you're
because
good.
this will help a lot with understanding.
So I think my thing is why I had them 25 is I think they are an aging roster, new OC, and when I got them in their last tier compared to the Raiders at 24, I just looked at the offenses and unfortunately, I was just more confident in the Raiders offense by quite a bit. I did obviously struggle. I do think the Saints defense is a little bit better, but when it comes to offense to me, it wasn't that close.
So okay, so here's my thing, and this is where I think a lot of people forget this. I don't blame people. So last year the Saints actually lost 6 games by 1 score, right? 1 score or less. So this thing is the Saints already were a scrappy team last year, where a lot of them, coin toss kind of things, and more than anything, just selling, like literally selling themselves, where they were in positions to win, and just kind of just more than anything, as Saints fans know, Dennis Allen and Pete Carmichael just completely folding, right? I think I'm looking at it more than anything where I'm very optimistic with Clinton Kubiak coming in, moving over to kind of much more of a West Coast style. I am very confident that, look, we saw Derek Carr last time in the West Coast with John Gruden, right? He was playing really well. And it's, and it was for, albeit a short time, that was definitely, I think, the best we could say the ball we've ever seen Derek Carr playing. And on top of that, he finished the season last year. I don't remember the exact numbers, but I'm pretty sure the last 4 weeks he was 12 touchdowns to 1 interception. So if Derek Carr can just keep it going, he's been getting rapport with this receiver room. I think, it's not like we have a world beating room, but I'm very high on Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed. If the young guys can come in and make an impact, right, I think there's some hope for me. I do still have a lot of faith in how Dennis Allen runs the defense. Regardless of who we have out there, Dennis Allen always has a productive defense, usually out on the field. Right. The reality is, though, the D line and the O line still leave a lot to be desired, and there's a lot of question marks, or especially around Chase Young. Can Trevor Penning make a jump this year? Can Talise Fuaga be the guy that I think that he could be? Right, those are all questions that we have to have answered. And Marshawn Lattimore could be traded. There's a lot of things on the table, but I think more than anything, I'm just looking at it from the optimistic standpoint of Clint Kubiak in the West Coast mixing with Derek Carr. Could it maybe? And if we win those games that we lost last year, and it's a similar kind of thing to last year, I could see the Saints churning out anywhere from, you know, 7 to 9 to 10 wins.
I think that's a fair assumption of what they can do. And you are correct. He was 12 and 1, 12 to 1 his last 4 games. Yeah, I mean, I just really do struggle with the offensive line. I like Fuwanga there as your tackle, and hopefully Penning, pans out. I just I just don't have the confidence. I think I have more confidence in Kubiak than I do in Dennis Allen. And I think that's a big problem. And you'd really also like to see, the receiving core take an even bigger step this year. I think Olave played good last year, but I think you want to see like another pretty good jump from him this year.
Oh,
I
absolutely. Like
Yeah.
he still leaves some to be desired. Like let me be clear, there's some times that he kind of, drops over the middle, or when he sees contact coming, he can be a little bit loose with the ball. I'll tell you as a Saints fan, absolutely, bro. There's definitely still a jump that has to be made. He's a good receiver, but he's not in the great, elite tier yet.
But I think you have a lot of potential with guys like A.T. Perry and Rashid Shaheed. Like those are guys that can take big jumps this year, and they aren't wide receiver ones, but they fall in line with, Chris Olave. And they also have Equanimous St. Brown, who, regardless what you think of him a receiver, is probably one of the best run blocking receivers in the league. So it was a great addition. And then, Alvin Kamara didn't really show many signs of slowing down last year. Like, obviously, he's not the same young guy that he was, but he's still a very productive running back. So Derek Carr had 3,800 yards last year, 25 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. Like, that is a very, like, I won't say very good, but that is a good year for a quarterback. Like, I think a lot of people give Derek Carr hate just because he's Derek Carr, and I'm definitely one of them, here and there. But at the same time, like,
It's turned into a meme.
I know he's not like a garbage quarterback, and I think that's just kind of what it is because of the fact that there's just been some questions around the Saints the last couple of years.
No, and the thing is, I can't blame anybody because if anything, if we'll say anything that has defined the Saints over the last few years, the biggest word that comes to any real Saints fan's mind would be critical inconsistency. All right, that's 2 words, but critical inconsistency are the big 2 words.
Moving into 24, we have the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, this may be one of the biggest wild cards here because we saw how they played with Antonio Pierce last year. I'm willing to say that if they would have been able to get Michael Penix, they would have probably made it to like within the teens. Like they would have been a teens team. I just don't know. Even with signing Gardner Minshew, I, I don't know if he's going to be the starter, right? Like I think it's still
Yeah, as of right
competition.
now, you know what? I agree where it's like, like we've been hearing. I agree with the notion that they're probably leaning Aiden O'Connell for the reasons of it makes sense. Like we basically know what Gardner's ceiling is at this point. We really don't necessarily know for sure what Aiden's ceiling is. Yes, it could be lower. Why not take the shot? You're still a team that has to build, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I do really like their receiving core still with Adams, Jacoby Myers, Michael Gallup, Jalen Guyton, Trey Tucker, and then you add Brock Bowers to the mix. And I think, I am pretty decently high on their O-line compared to what it was last year.
No,
I'm very impressed.
100%.
Now, I will say a lot of it is contingent on the fact of can Zamir White be a very good running back for you because you are losing Josh Jacobs. We know how Antonio Pierce wants to play. They want to run the ball, right? They want to be an aggressive, mauling team, and I think you have that in your O-line, but I just don't know if I have the trust in Zamir White to be that guy. I know they drafted Dylan Laub. He's not really that power back, but I still think he can be a valuable addition to the team.
I think he's gonna be sneaky, bro. I think he's gonna sneak his way to get a lot of reps. But
It's
that's
very,
beside the point.
it's very possible. I mean, I'm not. I mean, I don't like Alexander Madison at all as a running back in the league, so I don't think
Yeah,
he's
this
going
is
to be
storied.
stealing
This is
touches.
storied along YDKB. This is
Yeah,
YDKB lore at this point.
we've been preaching that Alexander Madison was never a one, and when they gave him the one spot last year, we were both like, "What are they doing?" And then we had a ton of Vikings fans be like, "Oh, he's fine." I'm like, "Well, that's why you traded for." Oh my God, who was the guy? Cam Akers, who
Yeah,
never
I was
worked
gonna say
out.
Acres.
Right, and I never understood the hype around him either. But I think the Raiders defense, they have a big scary need at corner, and I think that's going to be the death of them because I do like, their linebacking core isn't bad. We saw them perform last year. They have a good defensive line. It could be stacked if they all pan out, but outside of the quarterback position, cornerback is another one that's really scary, and I think that's really what's going to hold back this team.
No, yeah, I think that's really the bottom line. It's just like you're saying. Look, we don't really know how to feel about the quarterback situation, and there's a lot of questions on the defensive side of the ball. Like, I'm with you though, where look, if Christian Wilkins can come and be that plug that the Raiders are hoping he can be, this defense again, as we saw how they finished last year, they could end up being truly an elite defense. But to your point, if he's not the guy that they paid him to be with the DB room that they currently have, it's so volatile. They could be the best defense in the league. They could finish anywhere around a midline defense. I think it matters so much how Christian Wilkins comes and fills that money that they spent on him, how much of a cap chunk he's taking up. And then on the offensive side, I'm not going to echo much because you said basically everything I wanted to say. But more than anything else, because it's really the biggest thing for me, I actually am much higher on this O line than maybe even a lot of Raiders fans are. I think they're kind of really starting to put back together that O line. Things are really starting to come together, especially with Jackson Powers Johnson. Raiders fans, you guys are going to love that man. You guys are going to get back to moving that ball. But I'm with you though. Look, Azimir White, is he the guy? I think if you're a Raiders fan, you can feel confident that if they were comfortable getting rid of Josh Jacobs, he put on some weight this offseason. I think Zamir White, there's a good chance he can come in and really produce really well. And at the same time, if not, look, Dylan Lobb, I'm pretty confident Dylan Lobb can come in and steal, solid number of carries. So,
Well, something that I think is also very an interesting point before we move on is the Raiders really have or could have had a chance, in my opinion, if they got a quarterback to be second place in this division. I am a little bit lower on the Chargers than you are, and the Broncos we were both low on. Like they could have realistically been second in the division this year behind the Chiefs. So just unfortunate that they have been kind of left without a quarterback these last 2 years, which kind of sucks for AP. But I don't. It's going to be frustrating if Aiden O'Connell has a bad season because then it's like, okay, what's your plan? You go get a quarterback in this year's draft where it's kind of right now at least not anyone that's really popping out.
well, I'll say, and then all of a sudden, it's really rough because if like, just to add on, it's like if Aiden O'Connell doesn't develop this year, you got to move on to a whole new guy to pair with Devontae. Devontae's already getting far into that contract, getting older. Like, he have no rapport with the young guy. All of a sudden, there's a big reset on the receiving core. Yeah, you have Brock Bowers, but Brock Bowers also then not getting rapport with the new young guy. There's a lot of contingencies at place for the Raiders season.
Moving into the next team at 23, you had the Indianapolis Colts. I think this may be our biggest discrepancy because I had them at 14. I am
Ooh.
very high on the Colts this year. So why don't you give kind of like why you think they're going to be a team that's there, and I'll kind of try to preach like the highs I have on them.
Okay, no, here's my thing. Like for me, it's very simple, and it's not again. It's not even because let me be clear. Like I've said about a few other teams, this is one where I could be so far off base for the reason of look, I just don't know what to take of Anthony Richardson yet in terms of if he's going to be able to stay healthy, number one, and if he's a healthy starter, how he's going to produce for them the entire season. Because right, we saw some good flashes last year, but there's also some moments on tape where you're like, okay, a Rich, as we call him, a Richie, he still has a lot of growing to do. He still is going to be, he still is raw. I mean, he still is a raw player. We knew that when he was coming out of college, it was going to be a project. I think my thing is you love a lot of the roster. Like you love the way they built the O line. Love the way they built the D line. So you'd think traditionally I have them ranked much higher. It's just it solely comes down to the fact that if A Rich has a really bad season or he's hurt again a lot this season, that could really diminish the ceiling of this team. And that's just why I didn't feel comfortable ranking them much higher over teams where I'm much more confident in the QB situation, if that makes sense.
No, it makes sense. I think the reason I am so high on them is because when I watched Anthony Richardson last year, it was so encouraging. So encouraging. And what they were able to do with Joe Gardner Minshew last year, I think they can just be elevated by bringing in Joe Flacco as the backup. So I love the addition of AD Mitchell. Now you have AD Mitchell, you have Michael Pittman, you have Josh Downs. I know they were high on Brock Bowers, but you also add Laiatu Latu to an already really good defensive line. So I just think with the way that they played last year, if they were able to elevate that from quarterback play and even adding more weapons on offense, because a lot of people forget, they still got JT. They still have Jonathan Taylor. So they have a lot of weapons on offense. I think they may be one of the most overlooked teams this year as well. And I am super excited to see the development of Anthony Richardson, who I think is a lot farther along than many people think, because just the way I saw him get the ball out quickly in those first couple games last year gave me so much confidence. And just knowing the type of player he is, where he is all about getting better, it is just super encouraging to me as an Anthony Richards fan, and even following kind of the Colts now, because they are obviously they're only 3 hours away. So it's all I think about going and seeing games sometimes, and it's nice to kind of follow the success. They're just a fun young team. Let's get that out of the way. AD Mitchell, that addition is nice. So I think that's why I'm so high on the Colts this year.
No, they are. Let me be clear. Colts fans, it is nothing against the situation. You guys actually are put yourself in a really good situation for the future. That's just immediately this year where I'm saying if A Rich doesn't make a huge jump, because my thing is the QB tax. It's like the QB tax applies to the power rankings as well. You
Yeah.
know, it's like it's just more of a wild card for me. But if A Rich can make that big jump, there's no doubt that they could find themselves in the early teens by the end of the year. I mean, right? Like, let me be clear. This is not Colts fans. It's not set in stone. This is just taking off of what I have from last year. But the reality is, you guys could finish much higher than I have you right now. Let me be crystal clear.
At 21, you had the Vikings. I had them at 19. So, why do you think? I mean, I guess we both think the Vikings are going to be kind of a lower tier team this year. And I think that has to do with the fact of like Sam Darnold hopefully being their guy all year because you don't want to see JJ. I just think like their roster, that's the craziest thing about the Vikings is like their roster is so good. And it's kind of similar to the Raiders in a little bit of a different way, but they are a good team who lack good corners and outside of Byron Murphy, they lack good corners outside of Byron Murphy, and the quarterback position, at least for this year, is kind of a scratch.
No, yeah, like I think so. Again, like you said, they have talent in a lot of parts. You know, a lot of areas of the ball. I think, but the biggest thing is, like you said, bottom line. If Sam Darnold starts the whole year, which we expect, I can only have the ceiling of the team so high. And even if JJ were to be the starter, it wouldn't change much at all this rookie year because I don't expect much from JJ his first year. If they were to force him to fire, that'd be really bad, like we've said. So, and again, right, like the interior of the O line, still some work to be done, in my opinion. You love the core, obviously. You love the offensive core that they've put around JJ for the future. I think though we could agree the DB room, especially with Harrison Smith getting older, the DB room definitely is going to need an overhaul here sooner than later. And I would say the highlight of the team at this point, which is crazy, but it really is. The highlight of the team for the Vikings is probably this young, really, really talented linebacking core that they've built of Ivan Pace Jr. and Blake Cashman. I've been preaching the whole offseason. Blake Cashman was one of the steals of free agency. Vikings fans, if he can stay healthy for you guys are going to love Blake Cashman. All of a sudden, really a top 3 to 5 linebacker, interior linebacker duo in the league. You can even with outside linebackers, Jonathan Grenard, Van Ginkel, you guys have a fantastic 3-4 set, right? Like the Vikings have a lot of things to like. It just goes back to the QB situation more than anything else, right? In the immediate future, I can't really rate them much higher than we have them right now.
Well, it's also going to be hard when you are probably in one of the best divisions in football at this point. The NFC North is going to be a bloodbath. It's kind of not to the level of the AFC North, but it's just one of those divisions where it's like every week you're going to be, when you're playing a division rival, like there's no pushover games anymore. The Lions are a top 5 team in the NFL. The Packers have a great ascending young quarterback with a great play caller. The Bears have a young QB who hopefully can be the guy. Like every team in this division has a future going forward. Moving on to number 20, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I had them at 21. Yeah, this is a team that, in my opinion, is kind of weird because you're basically running it back. You've made some upgrades. Everyone's a little bit older. Baker has a new OC. We saw what he did last year. They won a playoff game. Todd Bowles is there. They're one of the teams to me that it just has so many question marks, not in terms of like positionally, but more of the fact of like, okay, what can this team do this year?
No, 100%. Like that's the thing too is I think, and I look at it like this a lot where in a sense, they kind of really overperformed last year. And we talked about this when they had their playoff run. It's like, well, is this a good thing or a bad thing long term? Like, would having the better draft capital, would having Todd Bowles out early, would all that have been better for the long term? Right. Again, I don't know. That's going to be that's to be desired and or not to be desired, but to be found out in the future. Look, again, re-signing Antoine Winfield, humongous for the future of this team. That was we knew it was had to be coming sooner or later. Best safety in the league as of right now huge part of that Super Bowl run. He it had to get done, right? I think though, again, you look outside of him on the defense, Vita Vea is your guy, but a lot of them just outside of him, unproven guys. Besides Levante David, who is getting old, there's just no sugarcoating it. Levante David's getting old, even though he still is a very productive player, future Hall of Famer, most underrated player in one of the most underrated players in league history. I'll always give him shouts when I can. But like the reality situation is, again. the interior of this O line just if Graham Barton, especially if Graham Barton doesn't have the rookie year that we think he's going to have, again, I think he's going to be really productive. I love him, but if he's not, and he has a poor, shaky rookie year, then and the interior guys that you drafted recently don't improve either. Well, then you have three positions on the line that are just really lackluster. And again, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, love them, but they're getting older. It's kind of like there's a lot of guys aging on this roster, and there's a lot of positions to be filled. So they are just in a very tricky position.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really relies, in my opinion, a lot on how Baker is able to play this year. And obviously, that's the, Achilles heel of a lot of teams is quarterback play. But we know what Baker has been throughout his career. I don't think he's always been in the best situation, but he is throwing to the best weapons of his career, and he has another year of chemistry with them. So, very positive outlook, but also, do we think Todd Bowles is the coach of the future? Probably not. And that's kind of what we were talking about. Like that playoff run last year, great in a vacuum, but in the grand scheme of things, may have just delayed things a little bit longer.
Yeah, no, that's kind of exactly where I sit on them. That's exactly where I sit on them. Also, I have to correct myself. I said Levante David, future Hall of Famer. I meant to say future Ring of Honor. Honestly, if the committee wasn't more bogus or less bogus in throughout the years, he should have much more accolades. Should have been a future Hall of Famer. Definitely though, future Bucks Ring of Honor, Bucks legend. Had to give him a shout out. He always deserves it. Even though I'm a Saints fan, that's how you know you're a real great player if I'm willing to shout out a rival.
At number 19, you had the Chicago Bears. I had them at 17, so kind of a similar place. Um, yeah, Dobbs, why don't you give me your feelings on this, and then I'll follow it up.
Okay, so I think the Bears I could actually summarize as one of the easiest summaries of any of the teams. The Bears could very much completely outperform where I have them at right now. And then also on that same token though, they could also perform slightly less where there's still right, there's still some growing pains and there's got it right, it's still a young team. Maybe a little they're very much in a weird range where they could very much outperform this, but they also could underperform it. I can see both things happening, even though I do lean towards the outperforming it. But again, with as high as I am, if you've been listening, you know how high I'm on Caleb Williams. I'm so high on Caleb Williams, it's ridiculous. I'm incredibly high on Romo Dunze. So to put it short, I'm very high on this offense. And then, right, Eberflus had this defense performing really well towards the second half last year. The defense was really coming together. If Caleb is the guy I think he is, and Flus keeps this defense moving how it was moving, they could very well finish much higher than this. But again, just when you're a rookie, no matter how high I am on you, no matter how much I love you, I feel like it would be doing a disservice ranking them higher than other guys that I know that have been proven. I already know what to expect from them. So that's really just the bottom line. I think the Bears could very well finish so much higher than this. They could finish a little bit lower than this if there's some growing pains this year. But I think all in all, I'm pretty comfortable with the way I have them ranked just because, again, off the information I have now, I haven't seen them play together, so I can't rank them too much higher.
Yeah, so I think my thing is, I think we're around the same thing is they could definitely outperform it. The biggest issue with them is still their second edge rusher, who hopefully Austin Booker can be that guy. I still think they add a vet in the kind of late free agency market. But also, I really do hope the center they took panned out because that has been a issue for them for the last couple years. And their O-line is okay. It definitely needs improvements. But overall, like, this is probably the best situation a number one overall pick has ever gone to, and we have one of the top receiving cores in the league. So very, very good. But we talk about teams like what drives the best teams in the league? Trenches, right? The Bears have one of the best receiving cores, probably one of the best secondaries in the league, one of the best linebacking cores in my opinion. But the defensive and offensive lines are just not up to snuff with the top teams in the league. And that will determine your wins and losses. So they have built this team outside in, which obviously not the worst thing in the world. It's very talented that way. But until they make the additions to the offensive and defensive lines, I don't see how you can rank them much higher than they are right now.
No, that's perfectly said and very level-headed take from a Bears fan. It's rare to find these days, but you're one of the rare you're one of the real ones left. You're keeping it real. We appreciate it as fans from the rest of the league.
I've seen so many disappointing years. I show my bias a little bit here and there, but I try not to get a little bit too crazy. Number 18, You had the Los Angeles Chargers. I had them at 23. So why, after losing two of his top receivers and kind of letting people walk in free agency, are you so high on the Chargers?
So again, you know what? I've been saying it a lot, but for me, it's really just this is one of the ones that's simpler. It's just simple for me on this one, right? Look, I'm so high on Justin Herbert when you take Brandon Staley out of the equation. Like if you've been listening, for longer than a year, you know my feelings on Brandon Staley and how I do truly believe this man was the literal wrench in the cog that was just absolutely breaking the Chargers machine, right? Like I think not only is this defense going to be much improved despite any losses that might have happened, despite any changes that have happened, I think this defense will be better without Staley. On top of that, look, you add Joe Alt to the O line. I think Joe Alt's going to be fantastic. Even though the right tackle thing, look, I think Joe Alt's going to be fantastic. And we've seen big more than anything. It's one of the weird ones where this is the one team I'm going to say this for. But we've seen what Jim Harbaugh does when he comes into situations. Like he just changes the culture. I am very much under the belief that he's going to be able to completely shift the culture of this team very quickly. Yet, despite the fact that, yes, they don't have all the talent in the world on the roster, I think he will get a lot of guys to perform much better than they performed last year. A lot of these young guys that they have on the O line to make big jumps to actually perform up to where they were drafted. And if they can do that and run the ball how I believe that they plan to run it with Greg Roman, I think this team can be a much better team than people expect.
So this is where I have an issue with it. Greg Roman is the OC. Like, I do think their line is a little bit away. I love their tackles, and, like, I don't hate Corey Linsley. But I will say this. There's a reason that Lamar Jackson wanted Greg Roman out of town. There's a reason why running or wide receivers hate playing in Greg Roman's system. With being as talented as Justin Herbert is, I just struggle to see his potential played out in a system like this. Now, I do think that if they're able to open up the run game, something that they have not been great at the last couple of years, that it'll make Justin Herbert really, really good because you're going to have to keep the defense honest with the run game. With that being said, I don't have much confidence in the receiving core. And Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa are getting older. And you have Derwin James, but then it's like Asante Samuel Jr. is okay. You have Alohi Gilman, Denzel Perryman, Poona Ford. I don't see it on defense. And I think they're still a year away from what they need to do on offense to make this thing work. So that's why I think I'm so low on the Chargers this year.
No, and I completely understand. Again, like I'm saying, for me, I'm leaning much more into Jim Harbaugh than anything else in terms of just like where I have them ranked. But if you were to ask me, do I expect them to be a playoff team this year? It still is no. And they still, to your point, they still have a lot of growing to do. I just think they could be one of those teams that really outperforms the roster strength just because of coaching.
I understand. I think Jim Harbaugh is going to be a great coach for them. And I will say, though, I think they may finish last in the AFC West this year.
Ooh, see, that's gonna be we're not with that we're gonna have to come back to this because that's either gonna be a fire take or it's gonna be or the we're gonna have to come back to it. That's either fire or it's gonna age like some milk on the patio. We're gonna have to come back to that one.
Oh, I'm sure. We'll see some age like milk takes in the
Yeah.
comments.
Oh no, you know what? There's always at least 5 to 10 every year. There has to be.
So at number 17, you had the Jacksonville Jaguars. I had them at number 20. My issue with the Jaguars is I just don't know what the fuck they're actually doing. And
What are they
Gabe
doing?
Davis as your kind of wide receiver 2 is okay, but we kind of saw what that was in
Is it okay?
Buffalo. I mean, he's the wide receiver 3, I guess. Like, it's just my thing is you have Christian Kirk, Brian Thomas Jr., and Gabe Davis. Yes, I think Brian Thomas Jr. obviously has the highest ceiling out of anyone in that room. But I don't know if you command him to be that wide receiver 1 right away if you're going to get the results. I think he can eventually be that. But in a room where you have talent that's so close, honestly, the wide receiver 1 to me is Evan Ingram, even though he's a tight end.
Oh no, literally.
I just don't. I like the Eric Armstead addition. You re-sign Josh Allen. but I just don't see in an AFC that is so competitive what they did in the offseason to move themselves ahead of other teams. And I think that is my main issue with Jacksonville.
No, yeah, you're spot on. And this again, it's like, could they be a playoff team? Yes, like they still this. They could very much be a playoff team, turn around a couple of those close games last year. Like if they do that, yes, they could still be a playoff team. Yeah. It's like I don't want to sit here and say I'm like low on the Jaguars because I'm not low on them. With Doug Peterson, it's like there's hope. Like they could definitely really turn things around and they could make this work. But I think like the guys they added on the interior and the re-signs that they made, it's like I just wasn't a big fan of what they did with the O-line, especially when you have Trevor Lawrence, you have to protect. Yeah, it's well documented how I feel about Gabe Davis at this point. I won't even harp. I'm done harping until the season comes along. And again, with Brian Thomas on the outside, having a win right away, very likely against team's best corners. I don't know. It could totally work out. It could hinder him. You know, the D line, you got some studs. You also have questions along the D line as well. Great linebacking core, that's for sure. This is also one of these teams where, like we were talking about, much like the Vikings, you have a great interior linebacker core, but the DB room is nothing amazing. Again, I'll say this: if Antonio Johnson can come and have another good year and play, even though he didn't have a lot of snaps last year, he's going to be probably getting a starting role this year. If he can come in, play well again this year, the DB room is still it's improving, it's getting better, but it still leaves room to be desired. And that's the thing is, I guess the bottom line is you could look at this roster and say, yeah, they have some really good pieces, but they still have a lot to be desired. I think it's kind of just the Jags' bottom line.
So